Hello, my name is Alfonso and welcome to the Edible Schoolyard, Kern County. Today we're going to be learning knife skills. Before we begin cutting vegetables, I want to teach you two techniques that we use here at the Edible Schoolyard on how to properly hold our knife. What I like to do is hold my knife as if I was shaking somebody's hand, making sure my two fingers are on the blade and it sits properly on my palm. The second one is making sure your other hand is going to be coming to a claw. This way your fingertips are protected and it's guiding the knife as you're cutting. The first technique that I'm going to teach you today is how to chop, and that means to cut food into bite-sized pieces. I'm using a cabbage today, and do you notice a flat surface? We need something with a flat surface on our cutting board so that it's not rolling all over the place. The first thing I'm going to do is grab my claw, put it over my vegetable, then grab my knife firmly, make sure it touches the cutting board, and then just claw and saw. Claw and saw. You need bite-sized pieces in order to fit in your fork so that they go inside your mouth easily. Like so. The second method I'm going to be teaching you today is how to mince. To mince means to cut food into tinier pieces, and we're going to be using the cross-chop method. I'm using rosemary today. It's a good example of something that could be minced because rosemary's big leaves can be very overpowering to all the other flavors in your dish. So when you want to cross chop, you're going to place one of your hands on top of your blade and the other one is going to be holding your knife. And you just rock back and forth, back and forth. And you do this for quite a while until you start seeing the food turn into little pieces. And that's how you mince. Up next, we're going to learn how to chiffonade, which is one of my favorite cuts. Chiffonade means to cut food into tiny ribbons. I'm going to be using some mint and some chard today. First thing I want to do is take the leaves out of my mint and stack them on top of each other, like a deck of cards, just like so. I'm going to be using 5 leaves today. Once that's ready, you want to roll them into a burrito, or pretend you're rolling an enchilada, whichever one you'd like, whichever one is your favorite. Second, you grab your knife and then you thinly slice it into ribbons. This is great for garnishing desserts or any other dish that you get to make at home. Just making more little ribbons. It adds a nice visual to the dish, just like so. I'll teach you a technique with chard as well. What I like to do with the chard is take the leaf out of the stem and roll that in half and pretend it's a burrito again. And we chiffonaded. This is good for little kids too who want their food into tiny pieces. It's also good for garnishing your dishes, your potatoes, any starch you have at home. It really does add contrast to the dish. And now we're going to dice, which means to cut food into tiny cubes. I would be using a carrot for an example today. What I like to do is trim off my stem and the tip. Once that's done, I like to cut my carrot in half to make it into smaller pieces. Then we cut it lengthwise. We don't want that thing rolling around our cutting board, remember? After that's done, you cut this into 2 sticks. And that's when the dicing begins. Gather those together and you cut them into cubes. This is good for soups or for salads. And that's a cube right there. One other method that we practice here at the Edible Schoolyard is teaching students how to Julienne. I'll be using a beet today for an example. Before we get started with the cutting, I'm going to peel it. Did you know that you can eat beets raw? It's better if you eat them make them into smaller pieces. A beety flavor could be too overpowering for someone who hasn't had a beet yet. Most people roast these. I like to eat them raw myself. I really enjoy the flavor. But before that, I want to peel it and peel it and peel it. And we're getting there, we're getting there. Remove my scraps. And I like to take off the tops as well. Take off the top, the tip, just like we took it out of our carrot. Flat side on our cutting board, and I cut that in half. What I'm doing before I do any matchstick cuts is I'm turning these into thin slices so that I can stack them on top of each other, and that's when the fun begins. So you stack them on top of each other, like so. And this is what Julienne is about, turning them into matchstick cuts. Look, we got beet matchsticks. Before I let you go, I'm going to teach you how to slice. What slice means is to cut food into thin slices. I'm going to be using a rainbow chard stem today because I like the way they look when I garnish stuff. These are equivalent to celery, but they're more nutritious because of their color. I like to top my salads off with rainbow chard stems. Thin slices will make the food look really pretty. I like to tell the students they sometimes look like little birds in the sky, those squiggly ones we used to do when we were kids. And that's how you thinly slice rainbow chard stems. I'm going to proceed over to the scallions, which are pretty much green onions, if you ask me. And you can top these off. You can top all your dishes off with green onions. I see them in a lot of dishes. They really do add some contrast to the dish. The green really pops out. And thin slices can make your dishes look really pretty. Look. Let's review what we did today. We first learned how to chop, which means to cut food into bite-sized pieces. Afterwards, we learned how to mince, which means to cut food into tinier pieces. After we minced, we learned how to chiffonade, which means to cut food into thin ribbons. And after we did a chiffonade, we learned how to dice, which means to cut food into cubes. Then we proceeded to learn how to julienne, which means to cut food into matchsticks. Last but not least, we learned how to slice, which means to cut food into thin pieces. I hope you guys had so much fun today, because I know I sure did. And please, always practice safety and make sure to always have fun. Thanks for joining us.